Good evening. We'll call the meeting to order. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Secretary, could we have a roll call vote, or a roll call, please? Roll call vote.
Thank you. Commissioner Maggio. Present. Commissioner Gregoire.
Here.
Commissioner Topchin.
Here. Commissioner
Charity.
Here.
Commissioner Buckles.
Present.
Vice Chair Bergstein.
Here.
Chair Kerpies.
Here. Have we all received a copy of the agenda?
Yes.
Is everyone okay with that? Yeah, we'll move that to the end after, or with staff comments. Okay. Any other changes to the agenda?
Move to accept as modified.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll adopt the agenda as amended. Now we'll move to approval of the minutes. Have we all had a chance to review the minutes from the November 9th meeting?
Motion to approve.
Maybe it wasn't close enough. Is that better?
Can you hear us now? Okay.
Okay.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the minutes for November 9th have been approved. Do we have any public speakers this evening?
I think Commissioner Charity needs to abstain from the vote on the minutes. Were you not present?
I don't think he's required to, but would you like to?
Yes, I abstain from the vote in the minutes.
Okay. Did you get that? There's an abstention for the minutes from Commissioner Charity. Do we have any public comments? All right.
Shocking.
We're going to go right into commissioner comments. Are there any comments from commission?
Not at this time.
None? Okay. Moving right along. So that brings us to new business. We'll have information on the City of Los Angeles Systematic Code Enforcement Program. And Commissioner Charity, would you like to introduce us to this program or to begin
Sure.
this presentation?
So when I joined the commission, we had significant interest in systematic code enforcement. So I visited a City of Los Angeles information session and made some contacts. And we're very fortunate tonight to have Daniel Williams with us, Senior Housing Inspector for the City of Los Angeles, to present to us on Los Angeles systematic code enforcement. We will allow him to get through the presentation before the lighting and the televised nature of our meeting, and then we'll be able to ask questions at the end of it.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Williams, would you like to join us? And somebody, I think, will adjust the lights here in a moment.
All right, good evening, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for the hospitality, allowing me in. I think I've met everyone except Margaret Buckles, so pleasure to meet you. And thank you for the hospitality. And I'm here as a senior inspector for the Housing Community Investment Department. I've been with the City of Los Angeles for about 25 years. Currently, my position is in code enforcement in a specialty division known as the Tenant Habitability Plan Review Section. However, I'm going to talk a little bit about our systematic code enforcement program.
Could you lift the microphone just a little bit closer to you? Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
So tonight I'm going to talk about our systematic code enforcement program known as SCEP. So the Los Angeles Housing Community Investment Department actually was formerly known as the Los Angeles Housing Department. And now we're going to talk about preparing for systematic code enforcement. So the program came about as a result of deteriorating housing stock, aging properties, post-civil unrest of 1992, and of course the post-Northridge earthquake of 1994. And the Blue Ribbon Committee on Slum Housing formed this in 1996. Thus came the SCEP Ordinance 172109 in 1998, and it was amended in 2000. The department's mission in regards to SCEP program is to promote the existing housing, promote existence of a sound and wholesome residential building, dwelling units, and neighborhoods by enforcement of such standards, regulation, and procedures as will remedy the existence of or prevent the development of or creation of dangerous, substandard, or unsanitary residential buildings and dwelling units. So currently there's a stock of about 750,000 rental units in the city of Los Angeles and 122,000 properties. We're currently formally on a SCEP program of about 3 years where we systematically go through the city of Los Angeles. Now it's been changed to a 4-year cycle. So we go through all of these properties in a 4-year cycle and systematically inspect all of those rental units, the exterior and the interior of these buildings. The way we do this is through our SCEP inspection. So what happens is a notice of inspection is mailed 30 days in advance to the owner of these properties, and then the property is also posted to allow the tenants that reside in there to know that we're coming for the inspection. The inspection is conducted in all areas of the properties, and if violations are cited, they'll be cited, and we'll send out what's called an order to comply, mailed to the owner or the responsible party for that property, whether it be the management company or the on-site manager. And the order is also posted on the property so that the tenants can also see these violations that have been cited on the property. In about 30 days, a reinspection is conducted. The same inspector comes back. If the violations are removed, he closes the case. And if he doesn't, then a failure to comply will result in further enforcement. So how does the owners prepare for inspection? Inform the tenants, of course, because you want to get access to the units. Owners normally have keys to the units, but if not, you want to allow the tenants to be prepared. Sometimes tenants are more comfortable being there when their units are inspected, so we want to definitely keep them in the loop as much as possible. We want to give notice for entry. If management or on-site manager is available, we want to make sure that we have all the keys to get access to these units in the event that the tenants are not there. That'll make it an easy inspection for the inspectors. Verify that all areas of the property are accessible, whether it be the apartments, the garages, basements, storage rooms, anything that is relevant to that property more than likely will be inspected for violations. It's a good idea for the management or the property owners to do a pre-inspection of the property. They'll have an opportunity to do that because the notice has been sent out 30 days in advance. That will help to alleviate any possible deficiencies that might be on the property before the inspector even arrives. Make necessary repairs prior to the inspection if possible, as I stated that. And if pets are there, you want to have those pets contained. Inspectors aren't all comfortable with dogs or cats or whatever it might be, so you definitely want to have those contained prior to the inspection. The inspection checklist. These are some of the things that the inspectors will look for when they come on the property. Obviously, a lack of proper maintenance. That could be deteriorated walls, ceilings, floors, broken or missing windows, doors, cabinets, a lack of security, warning systems, defective missing property, carbon monoxide detector, deteriorated, defective plumbing, electrical heating, light fixtures, and any approved construction use or occupancy additions. Unapproved construction, units that have been built and have not been approved by the City of Los Angeles Department of Building and Safety will be cited as well. So sometimes the City of Los Angeles will cite an owner for an unapproved construction, or maybe the owner is looking to do some new construction. So we'll give these information out to the owner so they can verify if the contractor has any infractions on his license. This is just the State of California Contracting and License Board. So this is a good resource that we will definitely encourage the owners to take a look at the contractor that they're going to use if there's some violations that need to be abated that requires a permit. And then we also have the American Architects of America. This is another one if they're looking to get plans or blueprints to correct the unapproved dwelling. Sometimes these these unapproved units require that plans and permits be pulled, so the owners can definitely lose these architect database here to find a reliable contract, a reliable architect. Okay, so now I'm going to go through a series of slides of photos of typically some of the things that the inspectors look for on the property. Obviously, this is a double key deadbolt, which means that you need a key to get in and a key to get out, which is a clear fire safety violation. You should not have that type of lock to get in and out of a unit. Here we're showing a lack of security bar quick release. Each bedroom sleeping area should have at least one window, if it has bars on it, that has a quick release to allow the tenant to get out of there in the event of an emergency. Normally it's something that they can release with their foot or a kick pad to open up that bar. Here we have an improperly installed smoke detector. As you can see, it's dangling, so that would be something that the inspector would definitely cite as a deficiency. Here we have one just clearly missing. And perhaps we have a fire extinguisher on the property that is not fully charged or hasn't been serviced in quite some time. The inspector will cite that. Most of the time that's in a common area or on the exterior of the building. Here we have a missing cover plate. Also, it's a damaged receptacle. That would be a clear deficiency that would be cited. Lack of sealed or sanitary counter. These are all things that the inspector will definitely cite, maintenance issues. Missing, broken, deteriorated cabinetry, worn flooring, dry rot and peeling paint, mold or interior walls that definitely need some maintenance, some paint, hasn't been painted in a while, so that would be something that we definitely want to get rid of. And here we're showing a loose fixture. It's kind of hard to see what's going on here, but if you look at the backsplash there, you see it's a little, there's a separation away from the wall, so that's something that the inspector would cite. That should be mounted securely to the wall, and it should have some caulking back there where water won't penetrate behind there. Here we have a leaking faucet. This is something that we definitely want to address. Most of the time, the water bills in the city of Los Angeles are paid by the owner, so this is something that the owner would definitely want to do as a pre-inspection, just randomly to check to see if there's any leaks, to keep not only the water bill down, but also stop from just the leaky faucet. That'll be something that'll be kind of annoying to the tenant that resides in there to hear water running all night, so we definitely don't want that as well. Okay, this site is something from the Los Angeles Department of Building and Safety. This is a site that the inspectors will use if they go on the property and let's say there's an unapproved construction or some unapproved plumbing or whatever it is. So we'll use this database to see if the owner has actually pulled some permits for that work. So this is the permit inspection report directly from the Department of Building and Safety, and we work very closely with them. So here is a typical deficiency of some unapproved plumbing, which is a P-trap underneath the sink that is unapproved. Here we have another water heater that might have been installed. The violations on here would be no earthquake straps, and right here we have what's called a temperature and pressure relief valve that should have a discharge pipe on there. If this water heater was to get overpressured and discharged, someone could be scalded, and it could possibly take off through the roof like a rocket. So that would definitely be a violation that would be cited. So the inspector would, first thing he would do is go into that database that I looked at previously and see if this water heater was even permitted to be installed. If it's not, then that will be a part of the order to comply to make sure that the owner is cited and that permit is required to make sure that deficiency is corrected. Here we have what the inspector cited as a garage converter. We have a lot of these that have been cited in the city of Los Angeles. As you know, there's a housing shortage stock, so sometimes owners will develop a unit in their garage, but if it's not permitted legally, this is something that the city of Los Angeles will definitely cite because we don't want anything to happen to the tenants in there because of unapproved plumbing, unapproved electricity that probably has not been inspected. Tenants in there, if something happens, unit burns up, and now that's going to be a fatality. Now, I'll kind of go into this. There's a couple of ordinances that have been passed in the city of Los Angeles. One is called the ADU, which is accessory dwelling unit, that's allowing the owners to actually create another unit in the backyard legally. And the other one would more be relevant to this one is called the UDU, which is the unapproved dwelling unit ordinance, that is allowing the owners to actually legalize these unapproved units. That they would have to go through the Department of Building and Safety zoning first, and then, of course, get the appropriate permits, go through the inspection process, and then potentially be able to legalize this unit and rent it out illegally. Here we have a photo of unapproved plumbing. If you look closely, you'll see the closet has a toilet in it. And so this is something that would definitely be cited, and the owner will be required to get that legalized or remove it. All right. In this photo, we have construction in progress without permits. And THP actually is an acronym for Tenant Habitability Plan, which is actually the section that I work in. So this shows where the balcony has been torn out. Here we have a door, and maybe the owner did not allow the tenants to know that this was going to happen. He just tore it out. Now the tenants have no access to come out. So what the tenant habitability plan does is it allows the tenants to be informed that this is going to impact their residents. So the owner would have to fill out a tenant habitability plan and give the tenants a 60-day notice to let them know that this is what we're going to do. They may have to potentially relocate these tenants, or they will be required to work between 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, and that is the way the ordinance is written for our tenant habitability plan. So that's just another photo of the landing being torn out, which would probably call for a tenant habitability plan. All right, here's just another photo of a garage conversion. If you look closely, you can see where the inspector saw where this possibly was some garage doors. The owner removed it, put some windows and bars in here. So when you see this little differentiation in the stucco, it's clearly saying that something's fishy there, and the owner, the inspector cited that, went to the database and found out that that was a garage, and so the owner was cited to restore that back to his approved use or get it permitted. Might have the potential to fall under the unapproved dwelling ordinance. And here's another one of an addition that was created without a permit. This little pop out here. And here is, you don't see this much since the program's been in place, but we've actually had these kind of violations where someone was actually sleeping on the roof, and that was definitely a violation. So we decided to remove that. And in addition to the worn roof, as you can see, that would be a definitely weatherproofing deficiency. Okay, here we have the broken window, which would be a violation. We would want them to correct that. Keep the cold air out and the warm air in. And here we have a lack of weatherproofing, peeling paint, which sometimes could require a specialist to come in, because most of the buildings that we inspect fall under what's called the RSO, which is the Rent Stabilization Ordinance. And these buildings were built on or before October the 1st, 1978. And so most of these buildings would more than likely have some form of lead-based paint in them. So we definitely would need a professional to remove that, and that would be cited in that as well to make sure that the appropriate contractor removes that paint. And that's just normally these type of violations are something that the tenant has created, but it would definitely be something that would be cited because we want that removed. A sanitation issue, open storage, canopies and tents that were installed, we want those removed. Now, this is probably one of the only violations that The SCEP program will cite directly against the tenant. And this is a tenant sanitation. So here we have some type of hoarding issue, and this will be a definitely violation against the tenant, which really just gives the owner leverage to either assist his tenant. Sometimes we see this a lot with elderly people that may have been in these buildings for years and they've just gathered this stuff. So we do have resources to try to help them. Special units like the Special Enforcement Unit known as SEU will go in and see exactly what the issue is and see how they can help get this situation cleared up. All right, in addition to that, we have our complaint inspection program. Over 1,000 complaints received a month, response within 72 hours, about 3 days. Non-urgent complaints, we sent out a 15-day letter, give the owner an opportunity to make corrections to those deficiencies if they're there. Then we'll show up on the site. If they're corrected, we'll close the case. There will not be any billing for that inspection. If we do cite it, then the department will assess a $201.50 bill for each inspection. So that means when they come out the first time, they cite the violations, they generate a notice to comply, it's $201.50. Once they return for the reinspection, it's another $201.50. And I won't get a lot into money just because we have a whole nother section that talks about our money part, but this is just quite relevant to our inspection program. Urgent complaints require immediate inspection. And we have a division for that known as IRP. IRP, got a lot of acronyms in our department. So IRP is an urgent repair program that come out, and there's something that we feel that will definitely affect the tenants. There'll be what's called a 48-hour post where the owner has to take care of that. If not, we have contractors that will come out and take care of those situations and, of course, bill the owner for those repairs. The inspection date is not convenient. Here's some of the questions that are asked. The inspection date is not convenient. Can we reschedule? Yes. Just contact the inspector. Most of the time, the department does not have a problem accommodating you. If the inspector does not accommodate you, you can always talk to his supervisor and see if you can work out something that way. But most of the time, the department is pretty lenient on rescheduling if it's a valid reason. And the inspector feels that there's probably no life-threatening situation when he comes on the property. Do I need to be present for an inspection? That's a question to the owner or the management. No, as long as the inspector can get access to all the units, maybe the tenants are home. This is why we post the building to keep them in the loop as well, and we can get in and do a complete inspection of the property. No. Is it a good idea to have a management or an owner there? Absolutely, but not necessary. The tenant removed the smoke detectors and screens. We hear that a lot. If the tenant did it, I just put him in. The inspector comes on the site. The inspector cites what he sees as a violation. He's not going to ask who took it down. If it's a violation, he's going to cite it, and that's why we encourage the owners to do a pre-inspection and get prepared for the inspection so that stuff won't happen when he gets there. Is a permit required to replace a water heater? Yes. I talked about that in the other slide, because we want to make sure it's installed properly. I'm doing more work than required. Can I get a time extension? If the violation requires a time extension, the department will grant one. 2 inspections are free in the systematic code enforcement program. The very first one and the second one. That's what they pay their fees for at the beginning of the year. I think it's $43 a unit. So they pay the SCEP fee at the beginning of the year, which gives them 2 inspections. The department comes out, they do the initial inspection, it's free. They come back to do the reinspection, it's free. If there's an extension that's required, it's going to be $201.50. Tenant will not allow entry. Well, that's most of the time a civil matter. When we hear that question, something's going on civilly where the tenant doesn't want to let you in because there's some legal stuff going on. There's a variety of things that happen like that. So the department will look at that, do some mediation to see if they can get you in. Most of the time, it is remedied. If not, there's because there's some civil matters, and the department won't get involved in that unless they're subpoenaed. What the department strongly recommends to landlords and tenants is tenant relations. It's very good for landlords and tenants to communicate with their tenants. It's not always possible, but it's better because it makes a much smoother inspection. So we definitely encourage them to do that. Tenants and landlords should try to maintain good relationships if possible. Tenants are recommended to try to resolve issues with the owner on their own before calling the department hotline. That's important. We definitely, when we talk to the tenants, they'll call us and we'll say, have you talked to the manager? Have you talked to the owner? Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. We'll encourage them to do that. That helps to alleviate the owner from being billed if it's not necessary. Mold, bed bugs, and pest control shall be reported to the health department. The Housing Community Investment Department does not have the resources to test for mold or get rid of bed bugs and pest control, so we refer them to that department for that. And this is the contact information. I'm sure you're all aware of the Housing Community Investment Department. That is our complaint hotline. That is a hotline for complaints as well as contact to our rent section for money-related issues. And just as a side note, I mentioned that the department, I know I'm here to talk about SCEP, but we also have a lot of specialty groups that work directly with our SCEP program. Programs such as I mentioned, SEU, Specialized Enforcement Unit, Urgent Repair Program, and also the Tenant Habitability Plan, which is the section that I work in, which was responsible for why Mayor Garcetti signed this in the legislation in 2015, which is Ordinance 183893. The City of Los Angeles has said that there's about 13,500 buildings that need to be retrofitted in the City of Los Angeles. It's called Soft Story Ordinance. So these buildings have to have what's called a tenant habitability plan administered, which is my task at the City of Los Angeles to make sure that the owners administer these plans to the tenants, because the tenants need to know that you're going to come in and you're going to impact their living conditions, whether it be noise or you have to come into the units while you're doing this retrofit. So the department has put that into place to minimize the impact to those tenants, known as the Tenant Habitability Plan or the Soft Story Ordinance. Tenant Habitability Plan program staff is available to assist anybody who needs assistance in preparing what's called the THP, Tenant Habitability Plan. The inspectors in that division, two of our inspectors are Charles Garcia and Douglas Webster, my colleague Steve Hofstad, and James McDivitt, and of course I am Daniel Williams. And that is our contact number for the Tenant Habitability Plan relevant questions. That is our email for seismic related to the THP, Soft Story Ordinance. And that is for primary renovation, which is when the owners are also going in to do a major renovation to the building, whether it be a complete plumbing repipe or electrical upgrade, which it will also impact the tenants because there will be service interruptions, the power will be off, and so we definitely want to give the tenants advance notice to let them know that the department is coming in. And that is all for me. Happy holidays, and it's actually my birthday. I'm 55 years old, so I thought that'd be a good closing note for me. Now, any questions you may have?
Thank you very much for that presentation. If we want to start from one end, go to the other, if you have any questions.
Yeah, Chair Corpus, I have a couple of questions. Good evening and happy birthday, Senior Inspector Williams. Thanks for spending this day with us here in West Hollywood with the Stabilization Commission. Thank you for the presentation. And although I work for the same department and I'm aware of the SCEP program, but I want to clarify some things. You mentioned in the presentation that the property owner is not required to be present at the during the inspection. That's correct, right?
Yes.
And how the inspector gains the entry access to the property if the owner is not going to be, let's say it's a locked, secured building, and the department send a notification about the SCEP inspection, giving the day and time, and the owner doesn't show up. So how the inspector will gain access to the property?
In a situation like that, again, it is recommended that the owner be there. It's recommended the owner, but if the inspector shows up for a scheduled inspection, the department has notified them that they're coming 30 days in advance, he gets there and he gets access, he's going to conduct his inspection. In the event he can't get access, he's going to do what's called a lockout. So the owner won't be billed for that inspection, but there will be no inspection conducted as well, but there will be no violation against the owner. If this continues to happen, then the department will post what's called a gain entry,
Okay.
because they do need to do the inspection, but they won't stop the inspection if the owner is not there.
All right. But can the owner, well, that answers the question. So the owner cannot refuse having the SCEP inspection with no reason. You know, after the department posts the notice, the owner cannot just refuse, saying that I don't need the inspection. Please don't contact me ever again, anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No.
What about the tenant? The tenant doesn't have to be present as long as the owner posts the 24-hour notice to enter. The owner manager can open the door and the inspector can gain access to the unit, right?
Absolutely.
Can the tenant request, a decline inspection, refuse to, and to provide inspection, to provide access to the unit, even if the 24-hour notice is posted? You mentioned it's a civil matter, but besides that, that's going to be a landlord-tenant situation. The department will not get involved.
If one of our inspectors shows up on a site and the tenant is refusing entry, the inspector's not going to push the issue. He's not going to push the issue because that's not his authority to do that. More than likely, there's an issue there. So he may come back and inform the owner, see if the owner can get him access. If not, the department can post a gain entry, and the tenant could be liable for that.
From your experience, if there were such instances when the tenants refused to provide access, what would be the reason why the tenant would refuse to provide entry? It seems like this is something that the tenant would benefit. So it's kind of hard to believe that a tenant would say no. But from your experience, what would be the reason?
I want to be nice and just say there's some civil matters going on.
Okay.
I want to be nice and see there's some civil matter going on. Obviously, some people take advantage of the services that the city provides as leverage for their civil matters. So let's just say that there's some violations been cited. Maybe there's a court issue going on. Maybe the tenant does not want those violations alleviated at this point. So maybe he might gain access. He won't deny access. That could be a reason. Just an example. So there could be a series of reasons why he doesn't want to do it. Or maybe he's just a tenant that doesn't want you in his unit. Maybe he has some hoarding issues, sanitation issues, and he doesn't want the department to see that. So it varies. It could be a number of reasons why that tenant doesn't want to allow you access.
Can the inspector cite the tenant for, let's say, if the unit is inspected and there are violations that are not caused by the owner but by the tenant, for example, sanitation or something like that, or hoarding, would the department cite the tenant for such violations?
Yes, for sanitation issues, that is about the only violation that the tenant can actually be cited for. Hoarding issues within the unit, that is a tenant sanitation violation that the inspector will cite them if they see it. Now, if they can't get in, typically what the inspector will do is let's say the inspector goes out and he gets in all the units except this one. What he's going to put on his notice to comply is provide access to that unit.
Okay.
And he's going to go back and he's going to conduct his reinspection of all the other units, and hopefully he gets into that unit. But now what happens on that is that if he cites the violations in that unit when he comes back, now he's generated an additional inspection. So now the owner is going to be liable for a bill because he has to come back in another 30 days for the violations that he cited in that unit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, well, in that sense, the inspection, the bill will still go to the landlord. It's not the tenant will be responsible to pay the citation, right?
That's correct.
So even if it's the tenant's violation, and if it's later revealed that it's a tenant violation, if there is a notice to comply or order issued, the bill would be the owner's responsibility.
Now, regarding to the tenant sanitation, I'm going to hold on saying that the owner is billed for that because I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure if the department bills the owner for the tenant sanitation.
Okay.
I'm not sure on that one.
I have one or two questions. Very, very quick one. I know that at the beginning of your presentation, you listed the typical habitability issues that the inspectors will look for in the unit, whether it's a chipping, peeling paint, or looking, faucet, or missing alarm, or some security bars or window bars, etc. So if there are any other violations that the tenant can bring up at the time of the inspection, let's say if the inspector didn't notice something, but the tenant is allowed to point out on something else or identify other violations that would be included in the report, right?
Absolutely. The inspector is human, so he may miss some stuff, and if the tenant brings it to his attention, it's a valid deficiency, the inspector will cite it.
Sorry if we move down the line and maybe we come back to.
The very last one, although probably not really related to your directly to the presentation, but maybe when you answer to other questions, you could mention quickly about the REAP as a result of the owner's failure to comply with the cited violations, and how SCEP inspection connected to REAP, because it's important for us to know if the owner fails to comply and correct the cited violations, what happens next. So what is the technical process? And if you wanna answer to that question later,
I can
answer
you
now.
want me- Okay. Well, as I mentioned, that the SCEP, this is on SCEP, but SCEP works in direct connection with two other divisions, which is rent and compliance. So if the inspector goes out and the violations have not been repaired, the inspector can give an extension. If the inspector goes back and the extensions are corrected, he can close the case. If it's not, it's going to go on to what's called further enforcement, which will go on a conveyor belt to our compliance section. Once it's on that conveyor belt, it is subject to our REAP program. As Agassi mentioned, the REAP is an acronym for Rent Escrow Account Program, where the tenants can possibly pay up to 50% of their rents into a rent escrow account program, which means that the owner won't get their rent. So that is a form of further enforcement if the violations are not corrected. I hope that answers the
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So for particularly egregious violations where it requires maybe a displacement of the tenant, what programs does the city have in place for those tenants where you have something really bad going on and that tenant might be displaced for repairs?
That would probably one of the programs that it would fall under is the tenant habitability program. Where there's a problem where the tenant can't reside in the unit while the work has been repaired, then the landlord would have to provide temporary housing for them, or sometimes permanent relocation. It just depends on the violation and the severity of it.
And then also too for it seems like you're giving the landlords good notice and you're giving the tenants good notice. So even with that notice, for cities that don't have inspections, I just wonder, what are the things that you're seeing out there? I guess it's a two-part question. What are the things that you see most commonly as violations when you're doing an inspection? And just for a body like us that's just kind of interested in learning, what do you think we may be missing in our community?
Well, one of the common violations we see is fire warning systems, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. That's just a basic, but very important, of course. We see a lot of that's missing in the units. The city of Los Angeles is not as bad as it used to be as far as unapproved units, because I think it's like our fourth cycle, so we've been through a lot of them, we've caught a lot of them, but initially we saw a lot of that unapproved units because there's a housing stock shortage. And I'm sure that's not just in LA. So I would assume that there's a lot of unapproved dwellings floating around on these multiple family dwellings. Maybe people are using their garages for living space. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was in West Hollywood as well.
And that's it for me.
Thank you.
First of all, happy birthday. I can think of no finer way to celebrate your birthday than coming to a West Hollywood Commission meeting. I am a landlord in the city of West Hollywood, and up until last year was a landlord in the Silver Lake area, so I'm well-versed in the program and a full proponent of it. Your staff was unfailingly polite, on time, accommodating if I need to change the schedule. They were good about saying, we're not going to cite you for this, but, this might need some attention at some point in time. I got dinged once. The inspector walked in with a ski pole, tested my smoke detectors, and there was a battery out. So I think really your program made me a better, more knowledgeable landlord. So I want to thank your staff for your professionalism helping me out. The one question I have, because we had one of our city council members tried to have a SCEP-style program enacted in West Hollywood, I think 5-6 years ago. And there was one council member objected, saying that we have a significant immigrant population from the former Soviet Union, that they would not allow people into their homes. The LGBT population wouldn't want them in their homes. I'm not sure I subscribe to either of those, but in your experience, have there been any particular any tenants that are particularly resistant to allowing you to come in even when it's been properly noticed? Aside from if there's I'm not talking about if there's a civil case going on between landlord and tenant, just off the record, they don't want you in the apartment. Has that been an issue?
No, well, I've been supervising now for a little over 6 years, so I don't get in the units as much as I used to, but from my personal experience, that was never an issue in the city of Los Angeles. I pretty much got access. There was no certain body of people that would deny access to units.
The thing, as my fellow commissioner Agassi mentioned, it can help the tenant to have a better unit if things are inspected and done on a timely basis.
Right. Now, there are certain units that I had to go in and I had to take my shoes off because of,
That clean? Yes.
which was okay.
My tenants are good, they weren't quite that good. That's my only question. Thank you so much for coming out this evening, sir.
My pleasure.
Mr. Maggio?
Could you tell me the approximate cost of a permit for a water heater replacement?
I can't give you that information. That would be something that the contractor, the owner, would have to provide because they vary. I'm not equipped to answer the cost. We don't answer questions as far as how much things would cost the owner.
So you're saying it could vary?
It could vary. We don't give those kind of recommendations. That's a typical question that we get from owners all the time. How much do you think it's going to cost, or do you know anyone you can refer? So that's why I show the slide as far as the contractor's database up there where you can find a reliable contractor and get that information.
Okay.
Any other questions? We can come back to, we can go back through afterwards. Commissioner Gore?
So the program seems to be relatively new. It was adopted in the 90s, right?
Yeah, about 20 years ago now. It's a little over.
So how was the implementation of it? Was there, in my imagination, the city was probably falling down, and you instituted this program, and in the initial years, you did lots of inspections, and everything got cleaned up, and in the subsequent years, things have been pretty good. But was that the experience of the city?
Yeah, initially, one of the slides showed that this program came about because there was some slumlord issues. There were some slumlord issues, clearly. The city Blue Ribbon Committee saw that landlords were collecting rent, but they weren't keeping their housing stock up. So they saw that it was a problem. So they formed a committee, thus came the SCEP program, which brought this systematic program around to make sure that the landlords would get these violations corrected. Some of those photos that I showed in the PowerPoint was actually some of the stuff that we actually cited initially when this program started. So it was pretty bad when it started in the late 90s. And so I believe it's the fourth cycle. It's gotten much better. So I hope that answers your question. It was pretty bad initially, and by going through these cycles, now most owners know about the housing department. I know I started in 2000, and a lot of times people would say, are you the housing authority? They would get us confused, but now I got to tell you something. Everybody knows who the Los Angeles Housing Department is, and they know that you should make sure these corrections have been done because the Housing Community Investment Department is coming back around in about 4 years. Now, in addition to that, because we have the complaint inspection, say we come around in 4 years and we do the inspection, we don't just go away. The tenant can call in and put a complaint in. If there's a violation, we'll come back to that same property that's been inspected to make sure that that violation is corrected.
Are you able to generalize about what are the strengths of the program and then what are the weaknesses of the program?
Well, the strength of the program is the mission, that we are improving the housing stock, and we're making these units are more habitable for the tenants that reside there, that they're safe and habitable for the children, the elderly people, because we have a variety of people that live in these units, which is a big strength. The weakness is sometimes owners don't want to allow us to do inspections. Sometimes people resent the department because we have the authority to come and make sure that these units are habitable. This is my building. What are you coming here for? I don't want you here. Or maybe the tenants don't want you here. We talked about. That is the only weakness, which to me is subordinated by the strength, because the majority is to make sure that these units are safe.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for a very informative program. Happy birthday. I remember when I lived in the city of Los Angeles, having people come and do the inspections, and I do remember them being very professional, very efficient, and I really appreciated having a city organization act proactively, making sure that my building was up to code and that I was living in a habitable place. And so I just want to clarify that this program is a City of Los Angeles program. We have our own program. No, there's none. So I get charged $6 a month for this program, and I'm a little bit confused about that.
Yeah, our staff can explain. Peter, you want to mention that? Or
Yeah,
tell her what we're getting
I
for our
might-
$6?
I think I can help out. Systematic code enforcement, the equivalent that we would have here, or the somewhat equivalent, is our code compliance division, which is a complaint-based action. So versus, as opposed to systematic, where you're visiting the properties every 3 to 4 years, regardless of if you hear anything. Our code enforcement officers go out if there's a complaint. The $6 that you're being charged a month on a pass-through is for the owner's participation in the rent stabilization program. So that's a rent stabilization fee, separate and apart from any kind of a code compliance program or a SCEP program. Or you don't charge for the SCEP, but you would charge for REAP. Is that?
Well, actually, there's a fee for SCEP as well.
You do? Okay. So we don't have that equivalent fee. The code compliance office
The
doesn't
$6
charge
fee
a
is
fee.
something separate, and it's just spelled out some way else.
Yeah, that's for the involuntary participation in rent stabilization.
Got it. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Just had a couple of questions. Again, thank you for the presentation tonight, and happy birthday. I'm sorry that I fell on tonight. In the city of Los Angeles, would this apply to, I don't know if there's crossover or not, but does this apply to tenants with Section 8 vouchers in these units?
Yes. If there's a Section 8 unit in any of these buildings that fall under the RSO, we will inspect those units as well.
And how does that create any sort of conflict, or how do you merge that, meld that with the inspections that are done by well, I guess in Los Angeles, would it be the same agency that would be doing Section 8?
If the building is 100% HUD owned, I think it's HUD owned, then the department will not inspect those buildings. It's government owned, we won't inspect those buildings. But if there's a privately owned building and the landlord has chosen to accept a Section 8 voucher, then that unit is subject to inspection just like the rest of them. And a lot of the problems that we run into with that is that the landlord might say, well, I just got an inspection from Section 8. Why are you guys coming back? Because it's a different agency, and this is the fee that that landlord is actually paying for that unit as well.
So they might receive Well, they've received their annual one with Section 8, and then they'll receive ones every 4 years or 3 or 4 years with.
Absolutely.
And violations, so you use the word violations and cited interchangeably. Cited, does that mean that they are automatically fined, or I'm not sure. So if you, on your first visit, can you explain which things might get an automatic citation that has a monetary value to it or a fine versus a citation that just says you need to fix this within 30 days?
All right. When I said cited, I'm referring to a violation, and it's going to be cited on the notice to comply. And that would fall under anything that the inspector falls. It could be some worn flooring to a damaged receptacle. It will be cited on the notice to comply and sent to the owner to correct. I use the word violation, which might be a little strong. I should have probably used the word deficiency, where a violation would be more towards a unapproved unit. Unapproved garage is a clear violation. The deficiency would probably be a smoke detector that's missing or a double key lock that needs to be changed. It can be corrected.
So would you say that when you're going in there the first time to inspect, whatever you're seeing, you're citing, and anything that's worth citing, you're citing, and then the property owner has 30 days to resolve the matter?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it comes up to about 45 days because the department allows mailing time.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
And you mentioned also in the presentation that you don't determine who your citation or your document, except in like the cases of the sanitation, goes directly to the property owner, right? And they're responsible in the department's eyes to resolve or to comply.
You said that, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So with the exception of sanitation issues, where it's the tenant sanitation issues, all other things that you see, a broken window, any other citation or any other citable offenses that you see, in the department's eyes, you're dealing directly with the landlord. Like the landlord is responsible for fixing those things when you come back.
That's correct.
Okay. And does the department, does your department have anything to do with the department that would help resolve matters between a landlord and tenant? Say, I'm using my apartment, for example, right now. So I hung a bicycle up on my wall.
Right.
And it took me a little longer than I expected to figure out where the stud was in the wall. So I've got, a few extra holes in the wall that I don't really need. I've been in my apartment for 4 years. Our ordinance says every 4 years you should get your walls painted. I don't need my walls painted right now, but you come in and inspect my apartment and you see all these holes, and it's time for my apartment to get a new paint job. Does my landlord now have to come in and paint and fix my holes?
Well, I can tell you how I would handle it if I was in the field. If I came to your apartment, Josh, and you did that, and you said, Inspector Williams, I did this, and I don't want my apartment painted. I'm going to have that conversation with the landlord, but I'm going to document that. The tenant told me he does not want his apartment painted, so I'm not going to hold that over the landlord's head to get him billed, because clearly a couple of little holes in your wall is not going to kill you. So that's going to be my biggest concern. So that's the way I would handle it if I was in the field. But I would definitely have to document that to make sure that the department knows what happened. I have to communicate that to let them know that you didn't want that done. You and the landlord worked it out. No problem.
So then when you come back in 30 days, what are you doing then?
Well, I'm not going to cite it if you're telling
Oh,
me
I
if
see.
you're
You're
not
gonna
if you're not going to allow the landlord to do it because you don't want it done, unless the landlord wants to repair it. Now, if he wants to repair it, then that's a different situation. If the landlord said, "Hey, I don't want these holes in my wall. I need to repair it," then we have to allow him to repair it. But if you guys have that's that tenant-landlord relationship. If you guys have said, "Well, okay, we're okay with leaving it this way," I'm going to document that, and I'm going to move on.
Are there any other questions?
I just want to say that the way I solve the holes are white toothpaste. It's the best. You have no holes with white toothpaste. Sensodyne.
Mr. Topchian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Williams, about the SCEP fees, I just wanted you to, if you could explain the cost of the systematic code enforcement program fee.
Well, I'll do my best. Now, that is actually handled by our rent section, as you know, but
And I can provide additional info on that.
Each year, the owner receives a bill in the mail where he has to register his property, and a SCEP fee is assessed to it. I think it's $43 a unit, or
$43.32.
$43.32 per unit. So that's for every unit in the building, and so that's how the department justifies the 2 free inspections, that the first one and the second one that come because of that fee. So you can imagine, the city of Los Angeles generates a pretty large income. If I mentioned there was about, what I say, it was like thousands of units in the city of Los Angeles. So each one of those units has a fee attached to it. So, and in addition to that, there's a RSO fee that has to be paid as well. And those are on the building. That RSO again is for the rent stabilization ordinance, and those for the buildings that were built before 1978. So they have to pay a fee for that as well. And I don't know what that fee is. I can see might be able to help me out with that.
$12.25 is the tenant's portion. Yeah.
And so that is how we justify the owner 2 inspections, free inspections.
Go ahead. Did you have a question?
No, that's it. That's all my questions. Thank you.
The last page where you had listed the inspectors and the senior inspectors, so is there just 5 of you in that?
Oh, I'm sorry. That is only for my section. I just put that in there as I added. That is only for the tenant habitability plan section.
Oh, okay.
However, if you contact any of those, we can get you to the right department through those emails. So that's only for the specialty group.
Okay. So how large is the department, or how large is the staff that actually does inspections to meet this once every 4 years?
I want to say about 400 or 500 inspectors now.
How many?
Maybe about 400. I'm not sure.
Lots then.
I'm sorry, I should have had that number. I'm not as sure.
No, that's
how
all
many
right.
staff.
That's more than I was.
But
even
we have
imagining,
quite
so.
a few, and have hired quite a few.
Okay.
Recently, we also have a assistant inspector program as well. So we have assistant inspectors and field inspectors, and of course senior inspectors, and right on.
And you said 400, right? I'm hearing the hundreds.
Don't quote me on that.
But I mean, you're talking over 100 at least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talking about a few hundreds.
Yeah.
I don't have any other questions. Does anyone else have any other questions? Well, thank you very much for this great presentation. We've learned a lot tonight. I know I have. And again, happy birthday.
All right,
Birthday.
my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I also just thank Commissioner Charity for taking the lead in organizing this and bringing them out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your leadership, Commissioner.
Talk about one document while we're on the subject. So I provided the commission a report titled A Guide to Proactive Rental Inspection Programs. So this is just broadening the conversation. It's from a nonprofit out of Oakland, California called Change Lab Solutions. The primary author on it was Amy Ackerman. She's a consulting attorney for that nonprofit. And long story short, it's just giving a bit of an overview about these inspection programs across the nation. And it's a lot to read through, but I just had a few notes for the commission on it, just to kind of elaborate on moving parts of this. So in reading through it, I found it to be interesting that certain cities had done different versions of pilot programs for this. Sacramento, for instance, piloted this on just 2 neighborhoods to see how it worked out. St. Louis has an inspection program that turns on the new tenancies. So instead of having a periodic inspection, it turns on when the building re-rents. In addition to this, some other cities and municipalities, their exemptions are more widespread than Los Angeles. So some exempt Section 8 and other buildings owned by the federal government, cities, or the state. And then some other cities add more buildings. They add hotels and motels and homes that are for rent, because in those jurisdictions, they had significant populations that were living longer term in motels and hotels, and they wanted to include those. Some, interestingly, only inspect the exterior of the buildings, just more concerned with the curb appeal and exterior of the buildings rather than the interior. And then in terms of other moving parts and considerations in looking at these inspections, there were interesting conversations about undocumented tenants refusing entry, of course, because of their immigration status, language barriers and other cultural barriers, but also something interesting just for our, city, entertainment and people trying to get into the entertainment profession and living, 6 people to a 2-bedroom and things of that nature because everybody's, pooling their rent, and that might be a violation that somebody doesn't want to have an inspector come find out. So I just wanted to elaborate on what exactly this was and just broaden the conversation to show you that this can be implemented and piloted in so many different ways around the country.
Before we close this, does anyone have any just general comments about what they've learned and or what they're aware of or what their thoughts are on this sort of program?
Sure. This is something that I've brought up over the years that I think I'm hoping that we would consider bringing this back as a more formal action item to discuss as perhaps a recommendation to council for further. But from my own experience living on the east side, and there are so many tenants who don't call code compliance, living in units that are that would be in violation of the SCEP ordinance. I have a neighbor who just became a caregiver to another neighbor, walked in the apartment, and this tenant is a hoarder, and there are rodent droppings in the apartment. Because there's no routine inspection going on these units, it's not going to get corrected. So as I mentioned in my comments during the presentation, it helped me to become a better, more knowledgeable landlord, both my property in Los Angeles and in West Hollywood. Made sure that my tenants were living in clean, safe environment. So I would really be in favor of bringing this back as some kind of an action item for us to discuss with some kind of a recommendation to council or not, depending on the outcome of that discussion.
Any other, Commissioner Topchin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, first I want to thank you, Commissioner Charity, for your leadership in organizing this presentation and bringing this to us for our discussion. I remember about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago actually, when I worked for the Coalition for Economic Survival. At the time, the city of West Hollywood had that pilot program, that code enforcement pilot program, and we're kind of testing. I think it was a year or two, very short. And I was working as a community outreach coordinator, assigned to assist the West Hollywood code enforcement officers in providing, a kind of a connection with the tenant for those tenants who didn't know what the program is for, and especially Russian-speaking, community tenants and others as well. So from that experience, I remember it was a very successful program, and the inspectors would go into the unit. The tenants didn't have any issues allowing them to inspect the property, inspect the units, and the inspectors would just identify those deficiencies and violations or deficiencies, and landlords were very friendly, and they would allow us access. And I think there was a very good kind of a team work, tenant, landlord, and the inspector. I didn't see any negative kind of reaction to the inspection. So that was my experience, and I did go to those units with the inspectors so many times, like maybe dozens of times, with different inspectors. I remember Eugene Alper, the senior inspector now, and I remember Gloria Alvarez also. She was one of the inspectors. I remember going out with both of them. Overall, I think my impression was a wonderful experience that we had at the time, and it was very, kind of upsetting or disappointing that that program didn't last for some reason. And I don't know what was the reason behind that, but hopefully we will have it back sometime soon, because City of Los Angeles from 1994, I believe, they have this program very successfully. And as Rob mentioned, as being a landlord in the City of Los Angeles, he had a great experience working with the SCEP inspectors, inspections. It's a great program. Tenants are very satisfied with the inspections. Maybe would be one or two tenants who would not allow access because of typically the hoarding conditions in the unit. They don't want the inspector to see that, or maybe because some drug use or something. But all other units, all other tenants are really in the building would be really happy to allow access, because what that would allow is to the inspectors to identify these deficiencies and have them corrected without the tenant actually calling the department and filing a complaint, which may result in maybe a retaliation by the landlord. So this is a kind of a very safe program for everybody, and the landlords are happy to see some minor things corrected quickly, so they wouldn't become a really bigger violation. And so they wouldn't be cited for for something bigger than that. So I think it's a great program, and I would really love to kind of recommend to the City Council to have something similar, have in West Hollywood, adopted maybe as a pilot program, so that we can review and see the successes. As for the fees, as the senior inspector mentioned, the annual fee per unit is $43.32, but under the RSO, Los Angeles City's rent stabilization ordinance, the owner is allowed only to charge $3.61 a month, which is totals $43.32 annually, $3.61 per month in addition to the rent, which is not part of the rent. So just like the registration fee, RSO registration fee, this is not a fee that I think if there will be any fees or something involved, because this fee covers completely the SCEP inspections. That should be better kind of explained to the community, to the tenants. The City of Los Angeles is really big, and when the tenants sometimes will get complaints asking, oh, their owner is charging me $361 every month, what is this illegal, why they're doing this, why are they charging the illegal fee? So then we have to explain to them that's a legal fee. So, but because we're a smaller community, we're a smaller city, I think if there were any fees involved, we would be able to, I'm pretty sure, kind of make a better outreach to the community and explain the fees involved. So I'm in full support of having something like similar to SCEP in City of West Hollywood, because it would allow to see what's going on in those units. A lot of tenants, they live in maybe in substandard conditions. We don't know because they never file complaints. We have no idea what's going on. Yes, the exteriors of the buildings, they're painted because of our beautiful ordinance that we have once every 7 years. The landlords are required to, maintain the outside, the facade, but what's going on inside the units, we don't really know unless we have access to see what's going on. So these are my comments. Thank you.
Just a quick question, Agassi. I wasn't aware that the city ever had a pilot program. I knew of the proactive code compliance that Jeff Jones was the first officer, but I wasn't aware the city of West Hollywood, are you saying at one point in time we did have a pilot program where we noticed landlords, we said we're coming in? I don't recall that. I remember the proactive where...
Yeah, it was maybe, but I think it was called proactive code compliance.
So there was we never had to date, we haven't had a program where we've sent a notice to landlords say we are coming to inspect your building, which is the proactive code compliance?
Yeah, there was a letter that the department would send to the property owner, and the owner will meet the inspector out there, and I would go as a community.
This was not a pilot program for an inspection, but this was just the proactive code compliance?
No, it was a pilot program for the SCEP-like inspection. Yeah, the inspector would go to the common areas through every unit. The owner would have notified the tenants, every tenant in the building. So we'd go knock on the door, introduce ourselves. Typically, would always get access to every unit. So, and the inspector would go also check the common areas. I remember there were cases that we actually identified even leaking pipes in the garage, and there was a water like for 4 weeks, and nobody reported on those things. And the inspectors identified those deficiencies immediately, worked with the owners to fix those things. So that it was very beneficial to the building, to the property, and of course the tenants who live there. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other, Mr. Maggio?
We have a list of housings. If housing services are lost here, we have a list that tells you what the deductions can be. So I was a little surprised there wasn't any guidelines for the cost of permits and even cost of replacement of water heaters and things like that. I thought there could be a guideline that I think that would be very helpful.
I think what he was saying is that that's not his department. Like, I mean, the city of Los Angeles has that information, but you'd have to ask the permit department.
Exactly.
Yeah. Commissioner Vacos?
Based on what we've heard, I think that a complaint-based responsive system is substantially inferior to a proactive investigatory system. I think the first reason is because it doesn't seem very efficient to me to have the responsibility for investigating be on a tenant who's a non-expert and would have to like wade through all of these different regulations and figure out what they mean, as opposed to someone who is a designated expert who works for the city. Even if you then knew what the regulations were, like you might not be trained to spot them, as we saw in some of the photos. The next reason is because there are reasons that even if a tenant was aware of a violation, they might not report that, they might fear retaliation, that sort of thing. And as Commissioner Bergstein pointed out, it just makes you a better landlord if you know that someone is coming every several years. You can learn from previous inspections, it at least gives you an incentive to go and clean things up 15 days before the inspector is going to come. So I would strongly support that as well.
I thought the presentation tonight was terrific. It sounds like the City of Los Angeles has an excellent program that, has done great work cleaning up the city. Definitely, it sounds like they dealt with their slumlord situation pretty effectively with this. The one thing I would say about it, I don't have a good sense of whether a program like this is even needed in the city of West Hollywood. I'm sure anecdotally everybody in this room could probably come up with examples of substandard housing that a program like this, would be able to identify and get remediated. But obviously before the city were to adopt a program like this with the associated cost and bureaucracy, it really would need to study whether a program like this is really even necessary in Los Angeles. My guess is that Los Angeles did, in fact, in the 1990s, have a slumlord problem. I don't have a sense that West Hollywood has that sort of problem. There may be plenty of units that need some work, but I don't think we have a substandard property problem in West Hollywood. So I'm not convinced a program like this would be necessarily worth, the expense in the effort to actually establish. But, certainly if our current code enforcement people who are out in the city all the time, if they think that this is something that the city should explore, definitely the city could do an initial assessment to see if something like this would be useful or desirable for the city.
I kind of agree with all the comments tonight. I think that this is a wonderful program for the city of Los Angeles. I think that it would be probably a wonderful program here in West Hollywood. I'm also not convinced necessarily that it's necessary, but I'm not opposed to studying it and seeing if it would be beneficial here. Some of the things, just if it were to come, or if we were to have some sort of similar program here, I would hope that we would want to add some of our West Hollywood features to it. And some of them is, privacy is a big issue to many tenants in the city. I think it's a big issue to many tenants in even Los Angeles, but didn't sound like it was that much of an impediment to the program. But if we had something here, I would suggest that there was a way to do it so that tenants could opt out if they chose to. Opt out in a not because of coercion, but just they wholly opt out of it. Because some of although I think his answer was really good about my scenario that I threw at him was really good, but I don't know if my landlord would necessarily agree. I think my landlord would expect me to fix the holes that I put in my wall, and I'm not ready to pay for those holes to be covered up in my wall, and I'm perfectly fine living in my apartment with those holes in my wall. Until it's toothpaste. And I'm sure my landlord's listening to this right now. But so those types of things, I wouldn't want to inadvertently put a fee on the tenants if there were some damage caused that were done by themselves but weren't life threatening, and now they're within 30 days also having to out of pocket pay for those damages. But other than that, I mean, I'm kind of I'm not opposed to it by any means. It's just it may not be necessary for this city, and maybe if staff could, if you know, or maybe come back to us at a future meeting and kind of let us know what the history of either this or a similar program that Augusty had talked about in our city, what the reasons for why it didn't continue on were, or anything like that. And I know when it comes to fees, fees probably wouldn't be set by a commission recommendation or even just council's just guesstimate. It would be based upon a study of what they would cost, and there would be an analysis behind any fee that would be associated with the program. But correct me if I'm wrong.
You're not. You're spot on. We're not allowed to charge fees over what the program would cost. So we would do a study of the fee, the impact of providing the service, and then we'd set the fee accordingly.
And do you happen to know the history here in West Hollywood of similar programs throughout the years that may have been tested? I know you haven't been here
I
since the beginning
know
of
a
time.
little
so-
bit. My knowledge is a little vague on it. I believe that Commissioners Bergstein and Topchin were talking about the same program, honestly, because of the people that Commissioner Topchin mentioned. Those are the people that were part of the proactive code enforcement. That's Jeff Jones and Gloria Vilas before him. It was funded through CDBG, so there was no funds that were there was no fee to the landlords. Our CDBG dollars now are far less than what they used to be. And so they're allocated for a different purpose. So our program was, because it was CDBG funded, it was only on the east side in the redevelopment area. And it did last, is it 4 or 5 years approximately? I'm not clear on outcomes or why it didn't progress, so I'm happy to come back with a little bit more information about that. If you like, I think that might fill in the gaps.
And I would suggest that anyone who wanted to see this program move forward, talk to Peter and gather more information, and if necessary, come back with a suggestion, and then we can talk about it more fully about any other concerns that we might have about that specific program that might want to recommend to the council.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
I can see two ways of this possibly moving forward. Either would be to re-agendize it as a more formal discussion item among the commission, or perhaps to form a subcommittee to discuss various options, speak with code compliance, Secret Staff, and then bring back a suggestion for further discussion at that point.
I just wouldn't want to see it expedited. Like, I wanted to make sure that if it came back and it was something we really wanted to do and recommend to council, whatever version of this program it would be, that it was, you know, we spent months
Fully
on it
vetted.
probably. Yeah, fully vetted. And
So how would you see, if we were to continue the discussion, how would that take place?
that's what I was kind of suggesting, is that if there were one or two of you that were really interested in moving this forward, that work with staff a little bit longer, come up with an idea, and then, I mean, we're all going to be here, hopefully.
How about this? Because we noticed it simply as a presentation, it's a receive and file tonight. Why don't we bring it back with a recommendation with that language that the commission could explore establishing a subcommittee of 2 to 3 and working through some of this and developing a more fleshed out recommendation that then could come back to the commission for further action.
Yeah, I'm
Do we
good
have to vote on that, or do we just say yes?
That's just the direction, right?
Okay, so we'll go ahead and agendize that for your next meeting in January.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. The housing report for 2016. We all should have received a housing report in our packet. And is this you, Peter?
Yeah, this is me. So I did provide you with copies prior to this meeting, just so that you had it in advance. I have been sharing this with other commissions, and it's in some board packets as well. For those new to the commission, we do a report on housing each year. Rent stabilization is one of the inclusive programs that the city has. So the city has, as you know, is a very inclusive community. In fact, it was founded on inclusion in 1984. One of the first actions the city took was to establish rent stabilization. Shortly after that, within a year, the city established an inclusionary housing program, established an affordable housing trust fund, and created the West Hollywood Community Housing Corporation. All of those actions happened from 1984 to 1986. So that's the history of the city and its inclusive policies and its inclusive focus. Rent stabilization is certainly one of the key programs in the city that maintains levels of affordability, and that's really what we're looking at doing, is making sure that people can remain in West Hollywood. Some of the highlights from this last year I included in your staff report. I'll just go through them briefly, and then I wanted to touch on a couple of other items in the report itself that I find interesting. So certainly something that hasn't happened in a long time that took a lot of us by surprise was that the number of rent-stabilized cities grew from 2015 to present. Not only did it grow, but several of the cities that had existing programs looked at strengthening their programs. Namely, our program next door to us in Beverly Hills actually became much stronger, where it was at 10% maximum a year. They dropped that to 3% a maximum, and they established relocation fees. They still have allowable evictions, but they do require a relocation fee with the eviction. So it's a step ahead in the right direction. Other cities that also worked on their ordinances, Oakland, certainly Berkeley, which has a very strong program, and they're constantly reinventing themselves. But then there was a number of ballot created programs in the Bay Area as well. Mountain View for one of them, Alameda for another. And it's interesting because each one of these programs is slightly different. Its creation, certainly its genesis, is always important because, if you will, a ballot created program is much harder to change. So when we, for instance, compare ourselves to the city of Santa Monica, we always have to remember that. City of Santa Monica has less flexibility in changing its program because it's not a program that was created by the council. The program was voted in. It's part of the charter. And for them to change many parts of their rent stabilization program, it has to go back to the people. So these are the these are the approaches, these are the ways that rent stabilization comes into being and comes into creation. This last year, I've been speaking at a number of different professional events about this, and people in city government are interested and they're curious, but they're also a little worried. And what I've seen, and the reality that I think that is out there, is that a program, a rent stabilization community, is going to become rent stabilized by a vote by an action of the people, by their voice. Here in West Hollywood, it was incorporation of a city from county land. And that was the prime driver. And it was an action by the council that brought the program into being. Other communities, and just most recently, it's been by a vote of the people. And so it tends to be fairly contentious. It's interesting, and I think that it just is telling that people want affordability. Now, West Hollywood, I think, tends to be a great example of many of the different ways that you can achieve your affordability. So other aspects in the report, so certainly the programs have grown. We still continue to be a renter community. And I think that that's an important fact for two reasons. One, it's our tenor, it's who we are, we're renters. But it's also important, and it's not touched on in this report, and I'm going to share, I'm working on this, and so for our next report for 2017, I really want to look at what that is in terms of development, future growth of the city, because what I see, because I also oversee the inclusionary housing program, as I look at the pipeline of projects coming through, most projects coming through are condos. And so when we look at the 50 to 100-year horizon, which I think we should, not many cities do, but housing lifetime, the half-life of housing is between 50 and 100 years. When you build something, it's going to be around for a while. And so I think that it's important for us as a city, we're a little over 30 years old now, we're young, but it would be important for us to look at that long-term horizon of 50 to 100 years and understand what we need in the end, and what if we can't change, for instance, that the fact that condos are being developed. Trust me, we cannot say no to that. But what we can do is we can prepare our community members for home ownership if that's in fact the direction that the city's going. You know, there's other actions that we can take to make sure that the community that we have here, Russian-speaking community, LGBT community, has the knowledge and the wherewithal to remain in the community. Other points, just pointing out the rent increases. We've always known what the rent-stabilized housing stock rent increases are, is because we control them. But this last report, we did provide the percentage increase on non-rent stabilized, which was 1.9%, probably far lower than most people expected out there. When you look at rent increases, really, the rent stabilization program really literally stabilizes the rent because it sets it at 1.75 for the entire year. That's what our program is right now, currently. But when you look at renting in the non-rent stabilized housing stock, it literally fluctuates, and it could fluctuate on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. It really goes up and down. And so to put that average down, yes, it was 1.9, but depending on when you moved into that stock, it could have been lower, it could have been higher. We know that our pre-Costa-Hawkins tenants still enjoy affordable rents. We know that because we know what the average rent was at that time when we had rent control, and we've been able to apply the AGAs. And if, in fact, a landlord applied every single AGA, that is on, you'll see that chart, that graphic, on page 24. And we list it out by bedroom size, and you can see it as the smaller green bar in each one of those charts is the rent. That's the average rents for that size unit in 1996. And we just increased it by the AGA every single year, and we started comparing that to the rents that we were receiving on the re-registration forms. So we know what the average new rents are and the rents for the long-term tenants. So
wait, I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time? You
Sure.
said if the chart shows if you took the AGAs, I kind of lost you there for a
yeah,
second.
if you look at the bars, look at the green bars there.
Yep.
That is how we got that green bar is we took the average rent, for instance, for the studios, the 0 bedrooms. We took the average rent that we knew of at 1996 when we controlled the rents completely. We told the landlord what their rent could be, the increase at vacancy. We took that rent and we increased it by the AGA each year after that. And so we know what, if a tenant stayed in their unit from 1996 forward, that's the maximum that they could be possibly charged in rent. Now, mind you, it's the maximum they possibly could be charged, because remember, our program doesn't allow banking. And so if you don't apply the AGA the year that it's in effect, you don't get to take it the next year or the year after.
So the green bar reflects if the landlord had taken every single adjustment.
Yes.
That would, okay.
Correct.
So it's
Correct.
a theoretical number.
It's a theoretical number. And perhaps the commissioner is also thinking about those cases, the MAR cases that you've seen where, in fact, it's not always that clear. And the reason that a hearing examiner has to get into those cases and really look at what the MAR is because if they have to prove that the AGA was applied each year and that the rent was increased in order to establish what the maximum allowable rent is. So the blue bar in those charts, that is the average new rents that we received that year on our re-registration forms. And so as you can see it's really stepping up. And today, or in 2016, which is almost a year ago at this point, almost $2,000 for a one-bedroom. That's no longer, I used to be able to say that we had moderate rents on average in our one-bedroom apartments in West Hollywood. That's no longer the case. It's a little bit above moderate. So we are slowly losing our affordability within our rent-stabilized housing stock. It is still, important note, it is still affordable if you have a two-bedroom and you have a roommate. So if you have two incomes, essentially two households living in a two-bedroom unit, you can still achieve a level of affordability in West Hollywood. And the one-bedroom rent of $2,000 is a little bit above moderate, but it's not extremely far out of the range. So we are still achieving some level of affordability. New affordable housing was produced in market rate development. What that is referring to is our inclusionary program. We have had some incredible increases, some wonderful increases, I should say, in our inclusionary program. In 2013, we had 108 units in the program, and you'll see this on page 14 of the report. There's 108 units in the program, and since then, we have increased the program to 322 by the end of 2016, and that is wonderful. And not only is it nice to have those additional units, those units were created along the boulevards in larger buildings that have not displaced tenants, they have not displaced neighborhoods, and they've really been effectively a net increase in units in the city. They've also allowed us to provide or offer housing to every displaced household for the last 3 years in West Hollywood. I'm not saying that every displaced household that was qualified for the inclusionary program accepted units. Interestingly enough, some households, it's their choice, and they wanted to leave the city, but they were offered, and they had the option of staying, and that is powerful. It's very powerful. You'll see. Yeah, jump in.
I think I understood you correctly, but so they may not have chosen to stay here, but they were offered. We were able to at least have the inventory to offer the inventory.
We started working with a different consultant, Alliance for Housing and Healing, that has really been taking a very proactive approach to helping people relocate that are being displaced by the Ellis Act. And so they have really stepped up and really helped. So they have been a real bonus. But the simple fact that we have housing units that we can provide, that we can offer as an option, it is wonderful. I just didn't want to mislead you to think that every single displaced household remained, because interestingly enough to me, and I was a little surprised by it, but it's everybody's free choice. Some people chose not to stay.
But I think and I understand your point about I think the important point is that our inventory is increasing in the inclusionary, so that at least those numbers are matching. Whether they actually transferred over or not is a different story. But because wasn't it only in 2 or 3, 4 years ago that we had the priority that we allowed that we had the ability to make prior residency here a priority for placement in some of these
No, that's actually been part of our program for a very long time.
It has, okay.
Yeah, and in fact, the ability for us to prioritize displaced households has also been part of our program for a very long time. Yeah.
Even with federal dollars, or even with certain...
These don't have federal dollars in them.
Okay. These are separate.
These are all developer dollar units for
Okay.
the most part. Some of the buildings have tax credit allocation dollars in them, but tax credit does allow you a local preference. In fact, some federal programs do as well. Certainly the Section 108 program does not, but we do not have, well, I shouldn't say that because Menorah Terrace may be a Section 108, but I don't believe that we have any housing programs that were built under that. So, also on this page, page 15, I want to point out these two bars, these two pie charts, because these two pie charts to me are one of the most important things in this report, because these tell us what this is what our housing need is. And they're estimations. These are provided from HUD. It's based on the American Community Survey data. It's part of the census. What this shows you is the top pie chart shows you the percentages of households that fit into the different income categories. The bottom one shows you the estimated number of households in West Hollywood that fit into those categories. So you'll see, quite honestly, we have a very large population that is earning above market. 42% earns above market income. And we need housing for above market households. We also, though, need housing and a desperate need for the very vulnerable. And if you see this, at 24.8, 25% of the population is very low income. And that's the households that are incredibly vulnerable to losing their housing. 16% low income, and then moderate at 17%. So you'll sometimes hear me use the word lower. And lower means everything below 80%, which means it's low and very low, extremely low, all rolled up into one. That term is used so you don't have to say extremely low, very low, low. You can say lower. And you're referring to everybody below 80%, which is a substantial portion of the population. So I can tell you, and you'll see this coming up when we do our housing element report and we prepare that for the state. The state does give us some minimum numbers that we need to meet in terms of housing. We have met those numbers. And yes, in fact, I'm proud to say that we've met those numbers. That's our state minimum. What we're building housing for is right here in these pie charts. That's our need. So we have a number of different programs that complement one another. Certainly the rent stabilization ordinance is a primary and key function and program that is assuring levels of affordability in the city to not only the very low, the low and the moderate, but also to that market rate. That's not at the high end of the market rate. They're just above moderate, but they still need some level of affordability. And you'll see in the bottom of page 14, that's our breakout of deed-restricted units in the city. And so that shows you kind of a window in 2016 about how many units we have operated by affordable nonprofits, for instance. 437 units with 22 new units under construction. That's the Blue Hibiscus building that's on Detroit that replaces the Detroit bungalows. We have the inclusionary housing program, which we've talked about, 322 units right now in operation. I'm proud to say that this year in our pipeline, we have enough, we have increased it. It's a little bit above 75. And now, in fact, it tops out a little bit above the number of affordable housing units that we have built. Meaning, I believe that we have now achieved in our inclusionary program more units than we built under redevelopment. We have 366 units that are owned by HUD or owned by the Housing Authority. We're part of the County Housing Authority, so that's what that HUCOLA is. It's the Housing Authority of the County of Los Angeles. And then we do have one building that's run by a for-profit company. It's right behind Whole Foods there on Fairfax. But they operate Section 8. And then we have an approximation because the county can no longer share data, exact data on Section 8. But we have an approximation that we have about 710 Section 8 units in the city, all of which, mainly, most of those would be within rent-stabilized housing.
And this 710, these are West Hollywood City vouchers, or?
Our vouchers were combined with the county vouchers some years ago. At one point, we had our own housing authority. We had about 90 vouchers, but around 2011, we were combined with the county. And so now it's a blend of our vouchers and the county vouchers.
So how Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, and I have nothing more in this
Oh.
report. I'd turn it over to questions.
So this the 366 number of units, is this the HUD buildings or this is project-based
No, that's the HUD buildings. Yeah.
HUD buildings? Okay.
Yeah, we
'cause I
have,
was-
there's 2 buildings on Kings and there's a building on Westmont.
Okay. Yeah, those HUD buildings. Right. I was confused between the Section 8 voucher and project-based. Okay.
Yeah, no, this Section 8 is clearly, this is the private vouchers. These are not the program-based vouchers.
Got it. Thank you.
Couple quick questions. The first one regarding the lack of population growth in West Hollywood as compared to the county. Do you have ideas about why that is?
The what?
The lack of population growth over the last 16 years, 0.4% versus 7.6 for the county.
We, West Hollywood as a community doesn't tend to have children. And our household size is very small compared to any of the other communities around us. It's 1.5 approximately. So that could be one of the bigger contributing factors. We are also fairly built out, even though I think that we've all felt some development happening, and there's always projects happening around us. In the greater picture, when we compare ourselves to other areas, we are very built out.
Do you happen to know approximately what the increase in number of units would have been over that same period of time?
Here in West Hollywood, I don't have that right off the top of my head. I can get that, and I can either provide that in an email or it's going to be in this next report that I do. And as you notice, this one I think it was a little late for me. But one thing or another happened. The 2017 report is going to be essentially an addendum to this report that just brings us up as a forecast, a look back at 17, a forecast for 18. I'm going to include that in that report. So if you can wait about a month or so, you'll have that number. I know. I'm going to try to deliver on it too.
The other question that I had is with respect to the 54% of new residential development that opted to just pay the city instead of building affordable housing. So more than half of them, are presumably deciding that it's just more economically beneficial for them to pay out. And I'm curious if the city has a way of calculating sort of like what the ideal equilibrium is, like how, when the payout should be raised, or when it becomes more efficient for the city to be using this money to build those affordable housing units as opposed to incentivizing developers to do it.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I kind of allude to a little bit of the issue that you mentioned too on page 15, where in fact when we receive these units built in a building, the affordability is achieved. It's realized right then when the building opens. When we collect the fee, that affordability is deferred until we can use it. And right now, West Hollywood is a hot housing market. In fact, the whole West Side is a hot housing market, and we're in direct competition with developers. So myself, I would personally I'd prefer not to be in direct competition with the developers, and I'd rather be achieving affordability through the market rate projects that they're building. These projects that are paying the fee, we've done fee analyses. Our most recent fee analysis was in 2014, where we looked at impacts, the impact fee versus and in lieu. So we've set our fees to try to match what that in lieu of or the impact would be. The fee-paying projects right now are 10 units or less. In 2010, we reduced that from 20 units projects. So in 2010, you could pay the fee if you were 20 units or less. We saw that there was a lot of projects coming in that were just paying the fee. Part of the reason, perhaps, why we had only 108 units in 2013. When we dropped it to 10, we actually started getting units in the building. We started increasing our inclusionary program. We still have a lot of projects, though, that are coming in that are, for instance, a 5 or a 7 unit project. Those projects, it's a little harder you don't have the economies of scale to produce that affordable unit. And so we may actually relook at that We're always kind of constantly judging the market, judging where, you know, how we can place our affordability. And so we will be looking at that again. I can tell you, I am a part of a group that there's about 500 programs that are part of Grounded Solutions Network, which is an inclusionary housing professional organization nationally. And I can tell you that we do we stand out as a really great program that's able to, we are actively using market forces to exact affordability, and we're really getting, we're fairly successful in doing it. But I appreciate those questions, because that's a really important key part of a program like this, is gauging where your fee is, what the rate is, and then what that trigger point is between fee to mandatory housing.
Thank you.
Is there a way to have that fee instead of every 2 years, or, I mean, 2 years would be a lot, but instead of every couple of years evaluating what the fee is, are we able to use the developer's numbers in their project finances to figure out what is fair for that property at that time, at that given time in moment in time, versus, you know, we're going off of numbers in 2014. You know, this year, there's probably a big difference between 2014 and 16, but, you know, in other years, it might not be.
Well, I'll tell you what, our fee does increase each year. And
Okay.
yeah, it does. It's based on the builder's cost index. So it does.
Kind of fixed to a
Yeah,
moving
it's
scale,
fixed
but-
to a metric that is supposed to represent actual building costs. So it is going up. It's escalating each year. It goes up with the fee schedule. There's no plans right now to redo a fee study at this point, but it's something that we've done in the past, and I'm sure that we'll do it again in the future, just so that we make sure that we're still keeping in pace with the market. You know, we are a very small city in a very large region, but not only are we within a region, but we're within a world that has international trade. And so at this point, honestly, the market in China can have big effects on the developer market in Los Angeles. And so you can realize that there's a number of different factors out there that can feed into the cost of development. Right now, in case you're interested, in LA County, the average affordable housing unit is costing a little over $450,000 to produce. And you can imagine what you need to do to put that together, because if your units, your one bedroom, for instance, are $450,000 and your rents, let's just say, for instance, hypothetically, they're $1,000, you can see there's a big gap in providing that affordability.
Any other comments or questions about the report?
Go ahead. No, Vice Chair.
Number of questions, and I give you permission to say that this is a theoretical question, and you have an answer, you don't have an answer, or it's just theory. Beginning in the introduction for the goals, maintain and enhance the quality of the housing stock and residential neighborhoods. Is that a theoretical? You know, how are we trying to enhance the existing housing stock?
Yeah, I would say that, for one, I'm not the creator of that goal, but I believe in it. And I see it as an aspirational. And if you've ever visited our affordable housing projects, you'd understand how we really do achieve this goal. So I know that there were some tours being done, and if you didn't have a chance to go on the tours, I'm hoping that we continue those tours, because you will see that the affordable housing buildings in in the different nonprofit housing providers' portfolios can be the best looking buildings on the street. And I think that just, you know, by example and by that presentation, it's enhancing the neighborhoods.
And two that are kind of interlocked. One is a statement: provide for a governmental environment that facilitates housing development and preservation. I've got preservation in big letters. And then reinvesting in aging apartment buildings. I know at one point in time we had a discussion, for lack of a better term, but we were allowing certain historic structures to sort of sell the air rights when a property could have had more units today built than are existing. So that was one way a historic property owner could perhaps generate some income to reinvest in their property. Have there been any other programs to particularly help aging owners of aging apartment buildings be able to maintain their buildings? I know it was more of a question pre-Costa-Hawkins when landlords were saying, my rents are capped so low, and now that they go to market rate upon vacancy, I think that's much less of an argument.
Yeah. So the program that you mentioned, I believe it's still on the books. It's community development runs that program, the air rights. I don't think that it's well used. So I really don't think it's used at all, but it is a program that's there. Community development also ran a study that explored different incentives for historic properties. And I know a couple of the commissioners, Commissioner Gregoire was on that panel. I believe Commissioner Kerpes, you were a backup, or you were there for a moment. So that incentives were run, and one of the interesting takeaways that for the commission from that I remember was that we did an analysis of rents and turnover in the historic buildings, and found that the historic buildings, for whatever reason, have had a little bit of a turnover that's higher than other properties, and in fact have higher rents. We did know that at on turnover and on re-rental, those buildings were netting much higher rents, and it's probably the desirability of the historic building. And so that could be a real impetus just in and of itself to preserve those older buildings, is that I think it looks by our data that you preserve your older building. If your older building has character, you'll be able to garner higher rents.
This may be another theoretical question. On page 17, it talks about low-income housing tax credits. Is this a target for Washington, D.C. through the budgetary process that we need to be concerned about evaporating? Or is that too theoretical?
I think no, I think it's very present. It might just be that I can't look into the crystal ball and see what's going to happen. But yeah, this is one of the programs that's there's questions about it, and that when you relate the it's the 9% program, which is hooked to corporate taxes, and if you lower the corporate tax structure, there's less incentives to invest into the housing tax credits, or the tax credit essentially is worth less than it was before. But I don't think that we should lose hope. It's not voted on into being, well, I haven't checked, but I don't think they've voted on it yet. And even when they did, it may be that the banks or other institutions may maintain some level of commitment for housing. But yeah, it's definitely not a step in the right direction. It's a step it's a step backwards. For all of the steps forward that we took locally here this last year, this is really a step in the wrong direction.
Maybe you could asterisk that one and come back with an answer after, if and when the House and the Senate pass a budget.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Once we have that vote, I think we'll know more.
On page 23, it says the number of apartments that have had rents brought to market rates. Two questions. There were 1,000 units that went to market rate in 2001. That was a huge difference in the other years. Don't know if there were any particular market conditions, or if we felt that landlords were holding units vacant post Costa-Hawkins, or
I think that
was a huge
you know,
number.
I've wondered about this too, and those were the years I believe that we were reconstructing Santa Monica Boulevard.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure if that has a direct correlation or not, but I believe that because I looked at that as well between 2002 2001. Those numbers are very high, and then it starts dropping down a little bit, and I think that was one of the dynamics that was happening here in the city. Was we were tearing out the railroad tracks and we were reconstructing the boulevard. I'm not sure at that point actually what was happening within the housing market itself. It certainly was right after full decontrol took effect as well. So,
On that same page, 64% of our units have become market rate upon vacancy. I've never been clear on if that meant 64% of the residences have turned over and gone to market rate, or if it's possible that it's less than 64% of the residences, but some units have turned over multiple times. So do you know, is that 64?
yeah, this is 64 is the number of that have had at least one turnover.
So it may not be 64% of our residences.
Well, we know, it's a squishy number.
Yeah.
And it's a squishy number because we're relying on landlord compliance. And I think that this kind of ties back into a discussion that the commission had earlier this year about unre-registered units or improperly registered units, and whether there should be some level of exemptions to landlords to bring those into compliance. We haven't brought that item forward yet, just for one reason or another. Other things have moved forward, and I'll cover those in my manager report at the end of the meeting. But 64%, it's squishy, but it's at least 64% have come to market. That would mean that that 36% or less are still pre-Costa-Hawkins tenants.
I'm going to hold you to that squishy. I think that's a great
It's
term.
incredibly squishy, so please don't hold me to those numbers. Something else that actually you might find interesting, I find interesting, is that once a unit turns over, the likelihood of it turning over again is higher. And the more it turns over, the more likely it is to turn over. And so that might in fact be because it's a unit that nobody likes, or it could be that the rents are higher. I don't, one or the other, or maybe it's both.
And final question, on page 27, talk about introducing guidelines for the landlords who wish to buy out households. I just want to clarify that whatever discussion that includes, it would be strictly voluntary on part of the tenant, that a landlord could not force a tenant to accept a buyout. But if they wish to reach an agreement, there's nothing illegal about going, Mr. Kerpes, I'm tired of you pounding holes in the wall without getting a contractor. I'd like to pay you X number of dollars. And Mr. Kerpes going, sure, I'll take the money. But I can't say, Mr. Kerpes, you must move out. So it's strictly voluntary on part of the tenant.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, in all honesty, what this program is, it's establishing requirements for those buyout agreements so that there's some sort of a framework of protections, greater protections in place than tenants have, you know, now without those requirements established. Let's say, for instance, Santa Monica, they require that the buyout agreements be posted, and they provide that as public information regionally throughout the city. And so a tenant could actually go and see what the going rate for buyout agreements are in their neighborhood, and so they have power to bargain at an appropriate rate.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, if somebody is, if an Ellis eviction is filed on the property, and a tenant voluntarily takes less than what they're owed, do our laws protect them to make sure the tenant does get the minimum that they, like that?
Yes. In that case, when the Ellis is filed on the property, we have a record of the tenancies, and we have proof that the relocation fees were paid.
But I mean, the tenant, even though they, by all other measurements, voluntarily took a lesser amount, the law entitles them to the dollar amount fixed by the city, right?
Yeah.
Or that we've.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, just a comment first. I want to thank you, Manager Noonan, for this report. And every year, what we see here, good things is that every year we see the increase in the number of inclusionary housing, affordable units in the city throughout the different programs that we offer. That's a good thing. The bad thing is when you look at this 24th page 24th, you see the average rates for the rental in the city. I think in 5 years from now, if we are renters, if we decide to move to somewhere else, there is no way we can afford a rent at the time. I mean, we can hardly afford the rent now. I mean, who can pay $2,000 average for one bedroom? And we're talking about the really old rent stabilized units. So in that sense, I want to kind of connect that with the prior discussion about the SCIP program. Is that I've seen from, I walk down the streets all the time in my neighborhood, and I see the buildings, the old buildings in kind of a poor shape sometimes, and that would definitely require some renovation or some work in it. And the rents are really high in those units. You see this rent sign, and sometimes I ask for the price, what's the unit's rent, and it's $2,200, $2,300 for one bedroom in my neighborhood in the east side. And and the buildings are really old and definitely need some work there. And people rent because there's a demand. People want to live in West Hollywood. It's clear. And that's why the prices are go up every year. So now, and the tenants, whether they don't have experience renting or I don't know what drives the tenant just to rent whatever they find, and there is no incentive for the landlords to really, do some renovation or bring up the units to kind of a standards, current modern standards or whatever. So people pay rent this $2,000 no matter what, in which condition the units will be. So, and then a year or 2 years later they leave, and then the new tenant will move in. Obviously, that's how I think that we can see that there's a lot of vacancies in those type of units. But what I see is that these properties, these units should be definitely maintained in a better way. If the owners are charging this much rent, I think at least they could, provide a better maintenance to the buildings or renovations or something, and then charge this kind of money. But because it's a desirable place to live, nobody really care if there are any deficiencies, if there are, cracked windows, or if you can open or close the window, or if there is a missing screen or something. Nobody cares about that. As long as you find the unit you like, okay, so I'm going to sign the lease agreement and move in and pay this $2,000. I think that's why there's no incentive for the property owners to really fix anything, because they offer whatever they offer, it's rented. So in that sense, I want to connect those two, the discussions that we had today. The program, when the inspectors can go into those units and see those deficiencies and require the owners to fix them, that will bring the life of that building, that will extend the life of the building. Oftentimes we speak about the housing market that is aging and deteriorating, and that's why that type of program will really help, to bring these buildings up to shape. So now, I know that next year we're going to see a higher dollar value for the one bedroom, for example. It's probably going to be 23, the average. So it's based on this, I see like every year is like $200 or $300 increase. So, and that's very sad. So as I said, the good thing is we have more inclusionary units, but the bad thing is that the prices go up every year, and it's just impossible for people even with good work to rent something decent in the city.
Are there any other questions or comments about the report? I think this is an excellent report. I wanted to ask, was there a reason on one of the graphs you mentioned, which was on page, it talks about the number of inclusionary units. There was a box, 3 years. So on
Page 14,
14,
I believe, or
yeah.
15?
Is there,
14?
yes, page 14, I'm sorry. Is there any reason why it's 86 to 13, 14 to 16, 17, 18? Because one's 2 years, one's 1 year, one's, then more. In future reports, is it possible, just so we can get an easy comparison, like just either they're all 2 years, or they're all 1 year, or they're all 5 years? Or?
Yeah, there was a little bit of a reason behind this, and it's not just because I started work with the city in 13. That just is happenstance. But in 2013, that marked, right after 2013 is when the Dillon and the Huxley opened, which were the first two of our larger buildings that were built along the boulevards on the east side. So what you saw after that was, with the completion of Domain and with Crown and Avalon Movie Town, that the number of units went up by 214 units. And so that's what that break is that you're seeing. And then the 17-18, I could make that 17-19, for instance. What that actually is, it's our pipeline. It's our projects that haven't been built yet. So that's just an anticipated, it's an aspirational or an expectational, if you will, that we'll have 99 units built in 17 to 18. Probably won't happen, to be honest.
Probably won't happen, or?
Well, sometimes it takes longer to get the financing together,
yeah.
or they get the entitlements and sell it because, something changes. For instance, there's a project on Fairfax, 1250 Fairfax, that, for all shapes and purposes should have been under construction by now. They're just now getting their financing together, so.
And then the only other suggestion, not a critique, it's just a suggestion, is almost all of the, whenever there's a comparison, so like, for example, on page 11, where hearings on the maximum allowable rent and rent decreases, it ends with which held 87 hearings in 2016. Then there was down below guiding new property owners, tenants, and prospective multi-unit housing buyers. In 2016, we sent welcome packets to 137 new landlords and 1,715 new tenants. It'd just be interesting to me to find out, even if you were just to compare it to the year before, just so we have some numbers to.
So in the report coming up, I actually look at the number of new tenancies, and we have that charted out, which is some of the things that we haven't put in the report in the past, but we have it now. We have a graphic of how many units, not just the rent levels that were received, but actually the number of new rentals that came into being.
The one that's in this report,
churn.
right? The page where it has 3 of those line graphs all on top of each
So
other.
all of that is about rent, but what you don't see in there is you don't know the number of unit types that are re-renting each year, and we have that. We have that now, and that was going to be part of the next report, is to just kind of look at what that is, and then also what we call churn, which is how often a unit re-rents, what's the turnover, and we have that rate as well.
Yeah, all this information is great. All right. I think that concludes. Did you have any further comments on this report before you go into your staff report?
I don't. Thank you for your time.
And do we have any other public comments?
No.
No. Then would you like to go into your staff report?
Yeah, thank you. So this is I wanted to look at the manager's look ahead here. So we do have December 28th has been canceled. We don't have any hearings for January 11th yet, or the 25th. We will go ahead and agendize the discussion for a SCEP-like program and establishing that subcommittee on the 11th. Looking farther down, the commission has canceled its February 8th meeting. I believe that's for Harvey Milk. It's February 22nd and then March 8th. I want you to have a look at those two. I sent out an email, kind of a little heads up about the council agenda. I wanted the commission to have a look at that report, item 2H. Item 2H kind of lays out some of the preparations that we're doing for mandatory seismic retrofits. And as Commissioner Bergstein, your question about buyout agreements is apt. You're going to be looking at those requirements on February 22nd. The intent there, as I said, is to establish requirements that landlords have in order to go through the buyout process so that we have a little more understanding of what's happening. Right now, we're just hearing anecdotally that it's happening. We want to make sure that tenants have the most information that they have the information that they need to make a good decision. For instance, because if you accept a buyout agreement and then your building is later Ellis'd, you don't in fact get priority in our inclusionary housing program. And if that's something of value to you, and if you want to stay in the community, that you're essentially giving that up. You need to know that. You're also going to look at a tenant habitability plan, and that's to establish minimum standards and expectations for habitability during major construction. This is really in preparation for seismic retrofitting, but it's also going to apply to any renovations that are happening. And we've seen some fairly egregious examples out there of major building renovation that, it's no fault on any part in the city because of it's the nature of permits and how they're pulled. A developer or a building owner can pull one permit at a time, and incrementally, it's, by death by 1,000 cuts, that you end up with this, when we get to the site and we say, oh my gosh, there's this multitude of permits that have been pulled here. Certainly, no fault on the city, but that in fact, we need habitability standards to be in place. in that time period, with that time period, with tenants living in the building. March 8th, you're going to look at the upward rent adjustment process. Some of the older commissioners may remember this process. It was a process established in the 90s. It was originally, I believe, established for seismic retrofitting of unreinforced masonry buildings. And it hasn't been used. In fact, we haven't received an application, I believe, that's actually been processed and gone through the process since 95 or somewhere around there. Perhaps part of the reason is, even though it's been on the books, landlords have been able to use this process for capital improvements or for seismic upgrades, and we've seen landlords are doing that work out there voluntarily right now, but they're not applying to this program. It could be, in fact, because Costa-Hawkins has given the landlords enough money to fund those projects. That's just one of the aspects out there in considerations, but as we see this going forward, we can't estimate right now what the cost of seismic retrofitting will be in every building. It's going to require an engineer to assess the building and to make a judgment on what that building specifically needs to retrofit, to bring it up to code. And so not every building is going to have a large cost associated with it, but we still find and believe that there is a potential that some buildings will have a large cost, and that large cost could actually motivate a landlord to come in and apply for upward rent adjustments. Now, the reason I explained that this was done during Costa-Hawkins is important because, and it hasn't been used since Costa-Hawkins, is important because it doesn't have protections in it that it should have post-Costa-Hawkins. For instance, and what the commission is going to look at is establishing a hardship exemption for tenants that can't afford the rent increase. We don't have that right now. The reason we didn't have it was, if you remember, before Costa-Hawkins, we controlled the rents throughout the city, and so if a tenant couldn't pay the rent in that apartment, they actually had the ability to just move and stay within the community. That we didn't have the out-of-reach rents that we have today. So the commission's going to look at that and explore that idea, and also a couple of other options. We're going out to the community in advance. We're going out to the community in February with some engagement, and we're going to provide all of that engagement to you so that you will have that information from the community at large, from impacted landlords and tenants, potentially impacted landlords and tenants. And you'll have time to formulate a recommendation if there is one, and then we'll bring that to the council. See, other items that I have. Actually, I should pause. I know that it's my report that I'm delivering, but I want to pause and offer an opportunity for questions if the commissioners have them. Yes, Commissioner Gregoire.
I'm a commissioner who was involved in some of those rents back in the day, and my sense is the reason why for rent increases because the formulas were rent increases $1 or $2 per unit wasn't worth the money they spent to go through the rent increase process. And it was the problems with the way the formulas work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something you should probably take a look at. I have a feeling it has nothing to do with Costa-Hawkins and everything to do with that, but word got out there in the community that it wasn't worth your time and money.
Good insight.
You mentioned that doing community outreach and stuff before this meeting, which I think is great, and I think the city truly does try to always get community input on items before, during, and even after we do policies. But this one, I think it's got to be done in such a way that it's almost like people are being asked, how much can you afford? So we can get real ideas of what's realistic. I don't think people will understand. This has never happened to them before. Their rents have always been, 1 or 2% a year increased. They saw LA, maybe they've heard about it in LA going on, but everyone seemed to end happy. I don't really know how that's working out, but everyone seemed to end those negotiations happy. this could have a huge impact on people's rents. So I hope that people, somehow the way it's marketed, it's almost scary so that it catches people's attention.
Well, please read the report. We do touch on the formula and the points that Commissioner Gregoire has pointed out. It is a fairly complicated formula. It requires a lot of paperwork and a lot of documentation. And we also looked at how other cities are approaching this. And LA and San Francisco, for instance, have opted for a direct cost pass-through. And I know that was a fairly, it was a long process in LA, and perhaps nobody's happy at the end of it. I think that it was, in fact, Commissioner Topshin's kind of nodding, so maybe you have some insight onto how that went down in Los Angeles. But that is another option that's there on the table. I don't have a formulated opinion one way or the other. We have the rent increase program on the books. And so the reality is, if a project came through now, that's the project that would be eligible to the landlord to use. And so we need to look at that, and we need to make sure that we have the tenant protections in place. If in fact the commission wanted to explore other options, I think that that's very much within your realm, and we can go through that exploration as well. Okay. Other items, real quick, you have a new copy of the rent regulations. There's a memo from Staff Attorney Holub on that. I owed you an email. I apologize I didn't get that email out. And Commissioner Bergstein, you had a question on that, and it was about what I'll do for the sake of time, and because it's getting a little late, is I will get that email out to you. I just wanted to acknowledge and make sure that I was serving you on that email. So, other items, hoarding came up in the discussion today. I just want the commission to know that we do have a hoarding task force, so we kind of take a different direction than Los Angeles does. We don't go in immediately and cite the tenant unless it's a health and safety issue that rises to the level of endangering the building. But if the tenant is experiencing hoarding issues, we have a contract with the Comprehensive Services Center and Jewish Family Service, and we will work with the tenant to reduce the hoarding to a level that's no longer considered hoarding. My last point. Just wanted to mention, this is not really relevant. It doesn't pertain directly to rent stabilization, but it still has a bearing on properties in the city, that especially those properties on the west side that are served by the Beverly Hills Water. Beverly Hills recently increased their water rates for the next 5 years. Those rates are going to go up stepwise, and they increased them at a higher rate, in fact 25% higher than for the citizens of Beverly Hills. The city's looking at that. Like I said, doesn't have a direct bearing on us. There is a word that's being used as a surcharge. You may or may not know we do have a pass-through for water surcharges in the rent regulations. However, my read of this is that it would not apply, even though people are using that word surcharge, because this is in fact just its increases in water rates. It's not what an actual surcharge would be. That's all of my comments. Oh, one last thing, and I apologize. March 22nd, we have been asked by the Arts Division for use of the council chambers. That is one of your meetings. What I would like to offer is that we can meet in the community room that's still here in the building. So it's still on the site. You know, the commission in your bylaws, it says that you meet at the West Hollywood Auditorium, which we no longer meet at, but the community room is nearby the council chambers. I think that they needed the meeting to film. It's an art event of some form or another. I can't remember what it was, but if the commission was amenable to it, we could move the meeting and still hold it at the community room. It may have to be a study session because it won't be televised, but I'll look into what type of a meeting it would be. That's all.
I'd be amenable to the to change in space, but I always kind of hark on it that if there's any opportunity for us to meet on the east side in Plummer Park, and you can
Want me
televise.
to look into
You know,
doing
the
that?
acoustics are not as good as they are here, but you can televise from Plummer Park.
Yeah, why don't we call it a special meeting and do it over there, and if that
Yeah,
requires
I'll look into that. Okay.
The question is, you said March 22nd?
March 22nd.
Okay, so,
Yeah, March 22nd.
okay, never mind. Sorry, I thought February 22nd.
That's it for me.
Thank you. Are there any commission comments?
I just want to say thank you to the City of Los Angeles, Daniel Williams, Ismael Hernandez, Chief Jermaine Mendoza, and Mrs. Shamika Henderson all helped me put this together. I have a thank you card for Daniel. If I could be quick to sign it before they leave, I'll start it over here. I didn't know it was his birthday, so I just thought it'd be nice to send a thank you card. I'm sending a thank you to all of those officials as well.
Thank you for putting that together tonight. That was an excellent presentation, well worth our time. Go ahead.
This is just the landlord, Rob Bergstein, speaking out, just saying that any tenant who wishes to attach anything to the walls of their apartment that's not a sticky hang-up that may create a hole in the wall, just beware that potentially, possibly, there might be ramifications from a landlord who may want that repaired at some point in time. And I know that everyone up here would, of course, call a contractor before they did any work in their apartment. Secondly, we had a lot of discussion tonight about the inclusionary housing, and I know it doesn't fall under our purveyorship, but it's about affordable housing. And, you know, I hear so often in the community that, you know, those people get the apartments, that only certain people seem to always get those apartments. And I want to share a quick story that about someone who did. Before Mr. Noonan worked for the City of West Hollywood, he was a resident in a building across the street from me. He never came to the neighborhood watch meetings, so we never met. It's a building that would benefit from a SCEP program. I'll just leave it at a charming unit. But the longest residing tenant of that building applied for and was just moved into the Dillon. So he's going from the Domain, where the faith metal plating used to be, the Domain. So it is really the people who get these inclusionary units, affordable units, are all the same people, are the ones that apply and qualify. It's pretty simple. But this movement of this housing is going to change this man's life. And for that, I'm grateful for everything the city does to provide as much affordable housing as we can squeeze in to 1.9 square miles. I think we have much to be proud of. And just quickly, happy holidays to everyone. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all of them together.
Adjourned. I'm Meg.